Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Home Games. I'm back in the basement, but not because of the historic tech fail from last week. It's because I'm absolutely stuffed with man flu. It is a coronavirus, just not that one. And this one is called a cold, which is pretty unpleasant. I suppose it's not as unpleasant, though it certainly felt like it at times. So rather than spreading germs around everybody else, here we are back down in the basement. And I'm joined by the legend in his own lunchtime that is Steve B. Good afternoon, Steve.
Mark, good to see you. In fact, I'm surprised to see you. Like I was just saying to you, it's been a nightmare this morning. And in fact, an hour ago, I was in a board meeting at work and my internet went. Not my internet, not my personal internet, but Virgin have let our whole area down once again. So the internet went during the board meeting, and which is bad enough. But I thought that's going to be difficult because I've got to do this thing with Mark in a minute. And I tried to fix it, tried to talk to Virgin about it because it's nothing to do with them apparently. So I jumped in my car, took my computer with me, drove to my youngest daughter's house, and here we are. I've just logged into her internet, and there you are. I'm about as prepared as I've ever been for anything. Yeah.
I was going to say we probably, leaving your notes behind and stuff probably isn't that big an issue. I'd have thought.
Well, I haven't got any notes with me, so this is all unscripted. Yeah, so
it's hard to tell. Often happens with home games. People think, how on earth do you script something for 45 minutes? The answer is rarely.
Well, I don't want to worry you, but the other thing I didn't bring with me was the lead for my computer. So if the 85% there runs out, then I'll be going anyway.
We know a little bit about battery problems from last week, actually. And while we're here, I owe everybody a huge apology for last week, for all the crap that went on. I know what it was now, and it has to do with new kit and calibration and all kinds of rubbish like that. So biggest apologies of all go to John Porteous, who bore the brunt of it. Biggest thanks go to Natalie and John for being total troopers and getting us through it. So very, very sorry. Won't happen again. New shit will go wrong, but not that particular thing again. Couple of just tiny bits of housekeeping while just a few more come in. We've got lots today, unsurprisingly, with a celeb like Steve. First things first, it's our birthday. Hooray! Happy birthday to us. So that's doesn't really achieve anything for housekeeping. I just feel good about it. I was going to bring us, I don't have any cake, but I do have a Scotch pancake upstairs. I was going to bring one down with a candle in it, but I forgot. So I haven't got anything. But there we are. The second thing is that it is a sort of, other than birthday, it's a big day for us because we put out our biggest research exercise of the year today. We launched 34 minutes ago, and that's called State of the Advisor Nation. It's our omnibus advisor attitudinal survey, and it is, I think, one of the biggest truly independent surveys out there. Nobody pays to put questions in it. It's not sponsored or any of that stuff. It's just us asking you things. We hope very much that lots of you will help us like you did last year. Over 500 firms did last year, and I'm kind of shooting for as close to 1,000 as we possibly can get. It's a bit of a chunky monkey. It takes anything from 20 to 40 minutes, so it really is a big one. But we do give you stuff back in return. That wouldn't be actual currency. That would be insane. But what we will do is make sure that you're well furnished with playbacks and sessions and all that stuff to find out what's going on, if that's any use. There is a button at the bottom, and if you can face doing that after this, then that would be insanely welcome. Thank you very much, please. Thank you. As ever, chat is open, and you can ask questions. I'll moderate this for Steve, and there's an ask a question button at the bottom. I don't think anyone should have any problems today, but given that we had some echo issues last week on top of everything else, I'll pop the little picture sound link.
I'll interrupt here because I'm just reading all these things going down the side of the screen, which is really nice. I quite like this. Thanks, Peter, for saying you like my drawings. Thanks very much. Brilliant.
Yes, absolutely. And we're certainly going to spend a bit of time talking about that. So that's all that stuff done. So let's dive in. And Steve, well, tell us what you're up to these days, because lots and lots of us obviously know you for loads and loads and loads of pension stuff over the years. Life's a little bit different for you now, and I think you have singularly failed to retire. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a bit ironic, really. I spent most of my career, call it a career, uh, uh, encouraging people to retire or extolling the virtues of retirement. And I've reached that kind of age when I should have retired a long time ago, really. But I'm still working. For the last well, decade or so, I've been working at Jargon-Free Benefits, as you know. We did some work with you, and that business was eventually sold a couple of years ago. And I actually thought that was the point where I was going to retire. As a, I'm old enough, already already past my state pension age. They hadn't managed to put the state pension age quickly enough, put it up quickly enough to stop me retiring. So I could have retired. I got my state pension, all of that stuff, and we sold sold the Jargon-Free Benefits business. And because I knew I was going to retire, I decided that I didn't want to be bored or anything. So I started a new company. Nothing to do with financial services, but Peter will be pleased to hear, and probably already knows. I actually started with a friend of mine. We been talking for a while about building a comic book and graphic novel publishing business, which we did. So we set that up, and I thought that would keep me busy in my retirement. But when Jargon-Free Benefits was eventually sold, it was sold to a company, Open Money, run by Anthony Morrow, who I've known for years and years. And Anthony asked me if I wanted to stay on as a director of Work Life, which is the Work Life Benefits business that we're running now. And I did. I said I would. I'd like to see how that turns out. So not only did I not give up work when I reached state pension age, but I've now got 2 jobs. So I've done the opposite of what I guess retirement's all about. But I'll probably retire properly in my next life. I'll retire when I'm 35 to make up for it. Become a footballer or something like that.
There surely must be an optimal taxation point where you just have to stop, right? The tax just forces you.
Well, no, not really. I mean, I don't think it's got anything to do with tax or money or anything like that. It's a question of just being active and doing things. I have to say, all the while that I've been working in pensions, which is a long time, really. I'm quite old now. I'm 70. Next January, I'm 70. So I'm well past state pension age, and I've been working since I was 18. So I kind of did my bit, if you like, in the pensions industry. And I thought I'd probably done enough, but I don't know. I'm enjoying working at Work Life, and we're achieving some great stuff. So I'll hang around a bit longer and see how it goes, I guess.
All right, we'll come back to that for sure. So that's an interesting concept about like we'd done enough or you'd done enough in terms of, I guess,
I've done my bit. Put it that way.
So I remember touring with you for many, many years, and as I've been saying to people in the promo for this, how many times I say, right, enough for me, and let's hear from Steve B now, and everyone would go, oh, thank God for that. This guy's not going to sell us whatever horrific stuff that I was trying to promote at the time, all of which we were very proud of course, at that point in time, and everybody could get a little bit of what it was that you did. What was it that you did, do you think, looking back all through simplification and all that? What did you achieve with tour after tour, date after date, plugging the pensions world out there?
Well, I think we did help with simplification. I mean, that's something you talk to me about simplification these days. Probably things are getting more complicated than ever after the last recent changes. But I think we had an effect on the way that means testing benefits were taken into account with auto enrolment, and I think that was the single public policy thing that what we were doing had an effect on that. So maybe we did have some effect, but essentially what I've always been doing. I mean, I'm a cartoonist, right? So I've always drawn cartoons. I just haven't had the time to devote to that I wish I'd had. But there's no point making a living out of drawing cartoons because there's no money in it. Some people make a bit of money out of it, but realistically, if you're going to live on your cartoon earnings for a lifetime's work, you're not going to earn very much. So you're better off to do it alongside a regular job, which nearly all the cartoonists I know, they're headmasters or they're doctors or something. They've got jobs that they do, but they also draw cartoons. So I've been a lifelong cartoonist. But when you draw cartoons, what you have to put up with, quite frankly, is that people always ask you if you can draw properly. right? And which like, that's nice, but can you draw properly? And by properly, what most people, particularly people who can't draw, what they mean is, can you make it really detailed? You know, you know, if you put more lines on, I'll regard that as a proper drawing. If you don't, so, and I think that's completely opposite of what I think drawing's all about. Anybody, quite frankly, I could show anybody how to do photorealistic drawings. I can do them. Anyone can do them. You slavishly put things together, loads of lines, loads of detail, more and more detail, and that is not what I call drawing properly. Anyone can do that. The hard thing is to capture somebody's face or features or what they're all about in a handful of lines, and that's cartooning, right? Just a few simple lines. You look at what people like Hiroshige used to do, Van Gogh, people like that, Da Vinci, people, you try and capture in a handful of lines what they could do, amazing. So anyone can do highly detailed stuff, but it's really hard to be succinct in line. Now, all I tried to do with my presentations, and you were with me when we did hundreds of those, was to cartoon with words. So anyone can come up with a load of words and a load of slides and a load of detail, but to try and succinctly say what you're talking about is much, much harder. And I think, can I draw properly? Yes, I already can. But can you look at drawings properly? No, you can't, is probably where I've always been coming from. Right? And I think it's the same with everything we've done. So in essence, we were taking something highly complex like pensions and breaking it down to its simplest form so that we could discuss it sensibly with people. Without the language that goes, this priesthood thing, this language that everyone's adopted in our industry. Everyone knows that they can only talk to each other. We find it easier to talk to people inside the industry than we ever do to talk to people outside of it, because they don't know our special language. They don't speak Latin like we do. Pensions Latin. And that's just pure nonsense.
It is, isn't it? And we sort of sometimes have this fight with people who we might be doing bits for. I'm just saying the art of getting your stuff out is an act of sacrifice. It's about what you leave out. It's not necessarily the bits that you say or what you say. You've got to be happy to leave things behind as well. And I guess there's something in the cartooning aspect of that I hadn't thought of it in that way, which is why you still do what you do and why people still want to listen to you.
About
that. Patrick Ingram from Parmenion. Hi, Patrick. Asks a little question here: Gilbert Shelton or Scott Adams?
Oh, Gilbert Shelton, I think, because I think I prefer the sort of the underground stuff from the 60s is important to me. It always was, but I'm in that age group, so that's the point. But it's the fabulous furry freak brothers. The stuff I draw is not that far from that, to be honest. The cartoons I do
anyway. Brilliant. Okay, and Dennis asks, as a pensions question, we won't all be pensions today, but have pensions been simplified? When we were touring Northampton on a wet Tuesday or whatever else, and you were calling it complication, I think.
Complication's a good word, I think.
It was a good word. Still is. It's certainly better than decumulation, which I maintain shouldn't.
Those words. Well, not only. Those words shouldn't exist. To be honest, they're just nonsense words, aren't they? But when we were doing that stuff prior to A-Day, I was pushing really hard, and so was the business we worked for, pushing really, really hard to get people to, the technical people in government, to get them to simplify we had 3 tax regimes that used to apply to pensions, and it depended on when you joined the pension scheme and what pension scheme you joined, which rules applied to you, and that was to say it's confusing. It was insultingly complex for people. So we wanted the industry. I think in the end, the ABI and everybody else was saying, we think simplification is a good aim for pensions. How can people invest in something that they don't properly understand? And not only that they don't properly understand, but they can't properly understand because nobody can. So, the idea of simplification was to make pensions more accessible, more transparent, all the things it should be. Those 3 regimes and all the complicated bits and pieces that hang off of it The deal was that we would have just one regime after A-Day, which was a great idea. But the problem I had with that, and problem I have that with that even today, is that we had one regime, which was an old regime that was brilliant, really. It was gave you a lot of rights. We had a regime that we had just prior to A-Day, which was not so good, and we had an interregnum bit in between which was not brilliant and not good. So we had a brilliant tax regime, a not so good one, and a sort of rubbish one, really. But we gave them all up in return for one tax regime. But that one tax regime, when they first proposed it, was going to be worse than the worst one we had at the time. And I think, well, it's not fair exchange. Yes, we want simplification, but we don't want to give up all of the benefits that we've got and end up with a tax regime that's worse than any of the ones that we've got now. And in the end, we ended up with one that was broadly the same as the worst of the three that we had before A-Day, which a lot of us in the industry at the time thought, it's fair enough. You can, by and large, get the same rights that you've got without all the complications and all that. So that's where we were. What's happened since A-Day, of course, is that regime that we had has got far worse. So that now we've got something that's far, far worse than anything we had before A-Day. So I think to that extent, A-Day was sort of like a pensions D-Day, if you like, but we lost, basically. So I think we've lost out. You've got things going on now which I'm a bit horrified by, if I'm being honest. The changes to the way national insurance working for people that are past retirement age but still at work. We've got this new type of national insurance now coming in, which will apply to some people. So it's a bit like tax in that it will apply to people who are working post-retirement age, although it won't apply at the moment, at least, to their pensions. But it's a bit like national insurance in that it will come from a lower threshold before you start paying it. So we end up with tax going forward, national insurance going forward, and another hybrid between tax and national insurance. Where that ends up, I mean, who knows? I don't know. I mean, the tax rates, as they are at the moment, people. Our tax rate 20% is probably it's certainly the lowest it's ever been. But when I started work back in 1970, the basic rate of tax was over 30%. At one point in the 70s, it was 35%, and at the end, I think when Margaret Thatcher came in the early 80s, it was 33%, and it gradually came down over the years to 20% where it is now. And people think that's normal, but I don't know. I think taxes of around mid 30% are probably normal at the basic rate. So that's kind of where we are with tax and national insurance. I wouldn't want to see. I used to say it years ago when we were working together that I wouldn't want to see tax and national insurance merge like some people wanted, because I thought that would be difficult for people who were relying on the tax release that they get from pensions. All this talk about tax relief. We don't actually get tax relief with pensions. We get tax deferment. We only pay tax on our pension income when we draw it as an income. So we don't pay tax on the money when we save it, but when we draw it as an income. That's an enormous leap of faith if you're a 20% taxpayer, that tax rates will still be 20% 50 years hence when you're my age. How do you know? So anyone saving in a pension, it's a big leap of faith.
So you used to describe that as EET, I think, and
well, that's the way people in the industry talk about it, so no one knows what they're talking about. But EET is exempt. Exempt tax going in, exempt growth, and taxed output. So that's a pension, or a big part of a pension. The best thing you could ever have is EEE in those terms, which is exempt saving, exempt income on the saving, and exempt output, which is exactly what you get with tax-free cash in a pension system. So that's brilliant. The fact we've got an EET system, as people say, with EEE for 25% of it for the tax-free cash. Absolutely brilliant. That's as good as you could get. You can get EE, which is essentially an ISA, tax money goes in, exempt growth, exempt output. TTE, tax growth, tax money going in, tax growth and exempt output, normal sort of building society savings account. The worst thing you can get is TTT, which we have to avoid at all costs, and that comes with compulsory pensions, of course, so we have to be very wary of those.
So what you're describing here is really interesting, because there's structural stuff in here which must speak to the work-life stuff that you do now with employee benefits, where you're dealing with real people who are nothing to do with this industry, and who I guess are deciding whether auto-enrollment is something they want to be part of, and other benefits, and starting to make those decisions, which I suspect are kind of foreign to a lot of us who work in the IFA world, where people have to make these trade-offs at quite a fundamental level, especially if they're early in their careers and starting off. Most of us in here, I know this is a terrible generalization, right? But most of us deal with people who've accumulated some wealth and are relatively affluent. Do you see attitudes towards pensions changing as part of whether it's valuable to these people inside their employee benefit systems?
Well, I mean, for the first time ever, which is why we formed Jargon-Free Benefits sort of 15 years ago, whenever it was, for the first time ever, everybody now has to have a private pension or access to it, at least, if they're a worker and earning enough money. So we lost the state second pension because of that, which I think was a great shame, because it wasn't really a good trade-off. We've lost the state second pension, and we've got everybody now in funded pension arrangements through the workplace. That, to me, meant that people would probably become more interested in pensions. But will they be more interested in saving for a pension? That's, I mean, who knows? But half the workforce have been relying for a long, long time on the state providing a second pension, an earnings-related pension, the old SERP scheme as it was, or S2P as it became, the state second pension. So anyone who didn't have a company pension scheme at work had the state providing a second pension scheme for them, until that was ditched and in favour of auto-enrolment. So you'd say half the working population, by and large, people who work for the SME firms, the smaller, half the people in the country work for tiny, tiny firms. It's only a handful of big firms that employ the other half of us. The big firms always provided pension schemes, and the small firms didn't. But when the government introduced auto-enrolment, I think they missed a massive trick, because it's not just pension schemes that the big firms have provided all these years, all these decades, since the early 60s, late 50s. They provided life assurance. They provided other really valuable and valued workplace benefits for employees. For me, auto-enrolment should have included a mandatory requirement for life assurance, group life assurance for on employers as well. All the and we got this whole range of benefits that half the population get when they go to work, and quite frankly take them for granted, and the other half of the workforce never get access to those benefits, which is where we're coming from with the work-life benefits thing that we're doing now. We're trying to make those benefits that everybody else takes for granted, we're making them available to people who work for tiny firms, 3-man firms, 2-man firms, tiny firms, 10-man firms. I think the product providers have come round a lot in the last 12 years or so, particularly the risk benefit providers. And now you're getting decent group rates for a lot of stuff for groups as small as 3. And I think that's so that I think there's clearly a big market there. But it's not just that these platforms like WorkLife are doing these days. It's also providing things like physical and sort of mental well-being, health stuff. There's been a big boom in the cash plan market over the last decade, and cash plans have been playing to the mental and physical health of people, as well as their.
Helps out a bit. I'm not sure everyone will be completely familiar with what that is.
Well, it's if you've got some workplace benefits that help you look after your health and your well-being, but what everybody in these smaller firms also lack is any real access to financial advice, and I think that's something we'd like to do something about as well. You know, half the population haven't got access to benefits at work, but a much larger proportion of that haven't got access to financial advice either. And that's something I'd like to have a conversation with financial advisors about in particular. And it's something that we think we can do through a platform.
That's really interesting. Okay, got some other questions in here. We'll do a pension freedoms one, and then I've got another comics one. Pension freedom one is from Mike. FCA data published this morning says 17% of DB to DC transfer advice was unsuitable. Was pension freedoms a good thing?
Well, I think pension freedoms are a really good thing. I mean, quite frankly, if people are as long as there's a limit to the amount of freedom you're given, which I know sounds weird, but as long as you're not allowed to give up so much of your savings that you could then fall on the rest of us for help. So as long as there's a floor, so that you'd never be dependent on, you would never be dependent on the rest of us to bail you out through benefits or support. Then what you do with your own money, by and large, should be up to you, not anybody else. So I do think pension freedoms, I was in favour of them before we had them. I was in favour of them when we got them, and I'm still in favour of them now. How they work in practice, though, is something quite different. And that, again, plays to the complexity of this stuff and the lack of knowledge that people have, even of the simplest things that are going on in their lives. If you're in a final salary pension scheme, as they used to be called, defined benefit pension scheme, if you're in a defined benefit pension scheme and you were lucky enough to have been in it for a long period of time, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, you would have accumulated a fortune in pension saving that you probably didn't even realize how much it was. It's quite easy for someone who's had that length of time in a good 60th final salary scheme, defined benefit scheme, to have accumulated a bigger pension cash pot than their own house. So the biggest asset they have in the world might well be the pension that they've got, and even though they think it's the house they're living in, and yet they have no idea where it's invested. They've got no idea how much it is. They've got no control over it. Why would anybody invest that much money in something they've got absolutely no idea about and no control over? I don't know, but millions of us did it. So we were given the pension freedoms, and we've got access to money that, quite frankly, most of us didn't even know was there. If you were running a defined benefit final salary pension scheme aimed at 60ths as an employer, your year-on-year costs for running that kind of benefit promise to your employees would be something like 23% of payroll, year in year. That's a fortune to pay into a pension scheme. Most employers only required us as employees to pay 5 or 6%, where they will pick up the lion's share of that. So people were getting two forms of pay for decades, with one big chunk of it, maybe up to a fifth of their pay, being put aside into a pension every year before they got the money to spend down the pub or on holidays or whatever else they did with their money. So we've got invisible wealth accumulating for millions of people for decades, and then we give people access to it. Of course, they're going to be interested in it. But then you need to make sure that people properly understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what they're giving up when they give up access to the insurances that could go with a regular income. So we're not very good at explaining annuities, even though it's the core product of our industry. Annuities are so hard for people to understand, but they're just insurance products. You're insuring against living longer than your money, that's all.
I remember you talking about invisible wealth and also something called accidental accrual, which I think was another.
Well, I accidentally accrued a fortune. And like everybody else, I had no idea there was such a lot of money building up in my pension pot, all the while that I was involved in what I thought was normal life.
And it seems to be that if we can't have invisible wealth or sort of getting people unknowingly doing this in one form or another, whether that's accepting, even though they never understand that trade-off is there, that the pay deal that's struck already takes account of some pension deal that's happening over here, or it's more explicit out there. We either seem to need that, or we talk about education and making people understand and that kind of thing. And before I get into the cartooning one, Leah Heath, thanks Leah, asks, how important do you think pension education is for people's financial well-being, and how best can small firms go about delivering this? I want to add one little bit to that, which is how much should people have to understand of this?
Well, there are 100 questions there, Mark. But
it's been so easy.
Is it a good idea to have pension education? Yes, but we have to be wary of the fact that if people really understood our pension system, they might not like it, right? So I'd rather tidy the system up first and make it worth understanding. But it's if we've got a complex system, that it doesn't matter if you have a complex system as long as it can't hurt you. So if you have a benign system, so it's massively complex, but it can't hurt you, then it doesn't matter. But if you've got a complex system and you can lose out by making the wrong decisions, then that's the worst thing in the world. And I think that's what we've got. We've got a massively complex system, and if you get it wrong, it can hurt you.
You see it with teachers, doctors, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, you won't find many people that could sit down and write a couple of pages of coherent sense about pensions, without getting into a tangle with it. And so is it worth spending a lot of time educating people in something that's basically nonsensical at its core? Probably not. It might be a better idea to think about what pensions are, and whether clearly the more money you put into the pension, the more use the pension is to you when you get to when you reach a stage of life that I'm at, called old. So once if you're saving money, but is it a good idea to lock all your money away while you're going through the real life of your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s? How are we going to get people to put money aside for that length of time if they don't properly understand it, or they're frightened of it, or they hope it'll be all right? I think you've got to make pension, you talk about pension freedoms. I think you've got to make pensions far more useful to people during the whole of their working lives, and not just at this one point where they reach this mythical thing called retirement. So some of the things Nest started doing this thing recently with these sidecar savings, which I think is quite interesting, quite useful, that you've got people saying, we've got, it's fine putting money aside for your pension, but before you do that, you really ought to think about having some ready money. This last 2 years have taught us anything. It's like, if people haven't got rainy day money, that's quite a bad thing. Not every financial advisor watching this will think, of course, we always make sure people have ready. But how do you make sure the entire population has ready money for rainy day savings, that kind of thing? And one way of doing it is what Nest have been talking about, which is to put money aside into something that's not a pension, that then rolls into the pension, maybe an ISA or something, that then rolls into the pension after you've shown that you didn't need it for a couple of years or so. I've got a slightly different view on that. I think in principle it's a good idea. But my view would be that you would fundamentally change the pension legislation itself, so that all people in all pension schemes will always have access to all of the money, or to the money they've paid in, the most recent money they've paid in say the last 2 years. So your last 2 years of contributions, those above the minimum required for auto enrolment, you should be able to take out at any time, just as though you'd had them in a building society. Now that way, everybody in a pension scheme tomorrow morning, at the stroke of a pen from government, could have access to a large amount of ready savings. Now, some people, I know a lot of people watching this be horrified. Oh, here he goes again. He's off. But I think if you gave people access to their savings like that, made their pensions more useful to them, they might be encouraged to put more in the first place. We don't have employers driving the value of pensions anymore. That's gone. That went with the demise of the defined benefit pension schemes in the private sector, at least. So we don't have employers driving that for us. If you're going to get individuals driving levels of saving approaching 20%, which it's a tremendous amount to ask somebody to put aside of their pension year in, year out. You've got to be able to let them use and have access to that money during the period that it's tied up, waiting to be released as income for when they get to retirement. You've got to give them access to it during their lives. You might even want to help them, let them use it to buy property, use it to help them buy property, help them start businesses in their 50s or whatever, 40s. If your own personal pot can be of some use to you outside of providing an income when you're in retirement, and then you're more likely to use it. Otherwise, I think pensions as we've known them up to now are probably dead in the water going forward.
So that sort of America, that's a bit like the 401ks in the States, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. But it's, well, if you're talking about 401ks, I'd also rather, we took the kind of attitude that we've got over there and bring that over here and make the tax relief that business owners get directly related to the, on their own pension, directly related to the amount of coverage and the value of coverage in the businesses they run for pensions. So there's nothing wrong with the vested interests of the business owners being with the growth of pensions in the workplace. We've got the opposite of that in this country, where in fact all the high earners and the business decision makers in all our big companies have essentially been excluded from the value of the pension system that we used to know years ago. I'm not sure that's a sensible thing to have done.
Yeah, and also based on what you're saying, those employers that do put a reasonable chunk by might in time start saying, I'm getting it doesn't achieve anything. Staff will still move without considering pensions as a valuable benefit. There are other things that they would rather have.
Well, I think there's a whole range of benefits that people value. A life assurance principle amongst those. I think that's. I think people forget that our pension scheme. We had a big pension scheme industry once in the UK, and it was built on the back of group life assurance.
Yeah. All right, let's get into something a little bit different for a little bit. We've got about 10 minutes left. Matthew, my son, age 9, loves comics like the Victor, Beano Dandy, Roy the Rovers, etc. Any others he should look out for?
Well, yeah, I mean,
yeah, you got any there?
I won't plug our own comics, but
go on, it's fine.
No. I've got one here. Fun enough, not because, in fact, this isn't here because I brought it with me when I ran around in the car, but it's because I'm in my daughter's house, and some of my grandchildren live here, and these are the comics they've got here. So this is a comic that we produced here in our business, but I think comics have had their heyday, just like pensions in a way. But I think when we set up Artithmeric, which is our publishing business, when we set up Artithmeric a few years ago, which I thought was going to be my retirement, we wanted to give the people that create comics. There are thousands of people all around the world that create comics all the time. They've got regular jobs in it, and I'm just one of them. I've always done things like that. I draw comics all the time. I probably always will. So how do you get them printed? So we've built a business that helps people realize the printing of their pensions and graphic novels, even if they only want to print one copy. So it's an interesting concept. So all I'd say is that anyone who's interested in comics, get looking around the internet and see what's around, because it's not just the Beano and the Dandy and a few things like that anymore. There are literally hundreds of thousands of comics being produced all around the world, and some of them are fabulous, absolutely brilliant. In fact, some of the stuff being produced these days, artistically and beautiful stuff being produced, and we're just glad to be able to do a little bit of that here in the UK.
That's good. Well, I've put a link to Artithmeric in the chat.
We came up with a name, by the way. It's a weird name, and I'll make my excuses for it here. My business partner and I were sitting around, and we decided that we couldn't find any name that we thought of. We couldn't find any domain names for them because they were all gone. So we decided the obvious thing to do was come up with a word that no one had ever used before. And I'm not being funny. You try it. You sit down as long as you like, come up with a word that no one's ever used, and then you find it somewhere on. Anyway, we came up with Artithmeric, which is a bit like arithmetic, but got art at the front, A-R-T. And although all our American clients called it Artithmeric for some reason, I don't know why, but and even to the point where we've studied it. But Artithmeric is a word that didn't exist until we invented it, and we did Google searches on it and everything, and it just simply didn't come up anywhere. So we were able to buy all the domain names and that because nobody else wanted them. And, but the problem we've got is that no one can spell it. It's one of but I've reached a stage now, a few years into running that business, that every time I see the word arithmetic, I think it says arithmetic. So maybe it will work over time and will be highly recognisable as a name. But it's been fun.
That sounds brilliant. And Matthew, I've got one for your was it your son? I can't remember. For your son. And we talked about it briefly when we were setting up, Steve, was the Phoenix.
Oh, the Phoenix is a great comic.
That's amazing. Hilarious. I read the Phoenix. Bunny versus Monkey, I think, is one of the funniest things I've ever read.
Well, that and Corpse Talk are the best things in it. It's fabulous. Yeah, Bunny versus Monkey, really good.
Yeah, really good. Steve, I mean, lots and lots and lots of years in front of the mast with pensions, and obviously you've got work life and Artivmeric, and these are keeping you busy. But your days, I think, of treading the boards and plugging around venues all around the country are long behind you now, aren't they?
Well, I don't do presentations anymore. Although I might do some for the work-life business, but that's different. You won't find me out there doing the big stage shows that I used to do. I decided a couple of years ago that the agency I worked for, I told them I was going to hang up my boots. I didn't think I knew enough about pensions going forward. Now, I have to be realistic. I can't regard myself now as an expert in pensions. I've been away from the mainstream of it for too long. So I don't think I should be doing that now. You should be doing it.
Oh man, I don't know. I was trying to find that thing you did with Jeremy Clarkson to put in the links here, but I can't find it on YouTube. That was funny.
It's still on there somewhere. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
It was. I saw a little clip of it somewhere, and boy, you both look a little bit different.
Well,
Jeremy.
We were younger then. I mean, that's the way photographs work. I don't know if you know that photographs can't be taken in the future.
Well, you see, we miss you pointing these things out for us. If somebody did want to sort of take that on from here, what's the key? I mean, you arguably did more to get pensions in the mainstream media, certainly, maybe even the trade media, where things were maybe, or financial media rather than trade, where they weren't talked about so much. What's the key? Is it just relentlessness, or what would somebody have to do what you did through the early 2000s and maybe the 90s?
Well, we were relentless. I mean, back then, we were doing maybe 100, 150 presentations around the country a year. Nobody does that, I don't think. But we, don't forget, it was a whole team of us doing that. So it was a business that wanted to do that, the Royal London Group. Then that's what they wanted to do, and I thought we did it really well. But it was a big effort to do that for a load of us. But I getting it into the mainstream. The Clarkson thing was about the nearest I've ever seen to pensions, being discussed in the way I'd like to see pensions discussed in the media. I haven't seen anybody doing that. I thought after I did that, everyone would be doing that kind of thing, but I've never seen anybody doing that since. My guess is pensions just aren't interesting enough as a topic for a general viewer. It's not even interesting enough for people in the industry to watch, is it?
Well, it is, and we've had a pretty good shot at it here. Listen, that's us up on our time. Steve, thank you so much as ever. It's great to see you. Still, hopefully, having some fun in and around the industry, but I love the look of Artivmeric as well. And hold up that one you were holding up before, because I'm going to order it for my kid. Who's
Dirk Brody. It's called Dirk Brody. It's by a friend of mine called Sean Hall. He lives in America. He's written a whole series of books, and we're publishing them as hardback graphic novels as well. And in fact, we're having it translated into French for the French market at the moment. And I think we got 300 creators on there at the moment, and another few hundred have got stuff that they're working on behind the scenes. So we're hoping to bring 1,000 comic creators to the marketplace over the next 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much as ever. Lovely to see you. Thank you for everybody for coming and watching. Again, as ever, that's it from us this week. Next week, we've got Iona Bain. And I can't remember who's interviewing Iona. I think it might be Rebecca, but that will be a good one as well. So I will send details about that soon. Thanks once again, everyone. Blanket out.